Darkness, utter darkness. I felt the sensation in my hands beginning again. I could hear sounds in my ears as if I was under sea. I could feel a trembling sound as if I could hear the very heartbeat of the earth right below in its core. My eyes opened up, and through the dust I saw a fresh burst of light. The whole room, or what was left of it, was shrouded in the brightest of lights. I just looked about me and noticed not one cot in my body, just dust. It was as if I had been placed in the building after it had impacted on the ground. I picked myself up, dusted my dirty clothes as best I could, and crawled out of a broken window pane and onto the surface. How long had occurred between the impact and now, I had no idea, but I gauged it must at least been a day. As the tank which had caused the collapse was not inhabited, the thugs had moved on to another place. I turned behind myself to see the building lay across the floor, my eyes filled with tears, and felt the very hair on my body raise. I felt a strange sensation when one happens to escape something he thought was imminent. The joy when someone is recognized, when love of friends comes his way, all these things and much more. How many million to one it was that I had escaped. Such a disaster, let alone a building falling so high. I dropped to my knees and began wailing. In the small breeze that carried the building dust into my dry and lined face, mouth and eyes, I felt the searing hot sun burn on my back. I felt as if I'd just been reborn. With this newfound euphoria, I began to run through the city with great speed, charging round as fast as I could, as if I had some point to prove, or maybe after escaping such a thing, I thought myself invincible. I bolted round corners, bends, down roads, pathways, through buildings, skidding, sweat flowing in the wind as I sped by, my heart beating in my ears, my breathing fast and furious. I felt like the wind, like the universe, the big bang as it exploded a million miles outwards, like a jet skimming the clouds above. I stopped, after I could run no more. My legs ached as if I had ran a marathon. I placed my arms on my knees and took deep and erratic breaths. After I regained my breath, I looked up to see where I was. I was standing outside a disused tube station. I went inside. The name read Elephant and Castle. I jumped over the barriers and onto the platform. 2 lines were empty. One had a train with its doors wide open. I walked inside and walked from one end to the other. On the floor lay a familiar sight. A tramp sprawled out. I pulled up his lifeless body and placed him on the chair. It was hard to know whether he was alive or dead, but the smell reassured any doubt I had. I found this train and entered the tunnel by foot. I left this train and entered the tunnel by foot. I walked a few yards and then came up to the back of another train that seemed to have halted there. I opened the emergency exit and walked into the lit train. I had walked through 3 carriages and then I found a full carriage full of dead bodies, propped up against the seats, bags in their hands, cups, plates of food, newspapers, out of date. I covered my nose and walked through the crowded carriage. As I got to the front end of the train, it got worse. As people who had obviously been standing up due to the lack of space were piled up one another on the floor. One was even hanging by the pull cord. I got to the front. I decided I would try pulling the lever to start the train, and to my surprise, it worked. And the train jogged down the line. I passed one station and another until I found myself out in the open. I pulled the lever down and climbed out of the door, to the grassy embankment that beckoned. I walked down the track till I found myself at another station. I walked through the ticket office to the town outside. By this time my legs were aching. I knew I couldn't walk all the way to my parents' house. I had to get some means of transport. I didn't have to go far till I found another bus, this time a big red double-decker. I got inside, pulled the dead driver out of his seat and threw him on the pavement along with 3 passengers, and started the engine and was off. A day on the road, maybe 2 past. It was about 8 in the evening, when I pulled up to the front of my house. It was a familiar place. I had spent most of my childhood there, and looked the same as I had left it. The street lamps were out. I broke the door open with my shoulder and walked into the living room, calling out for Mum and Dad, but got no answer. I switched the light on. It didn't work. I found a candle unlit in the kitchen drawer and lit it with some matches. Kitchen drawer and lit it. I found a candle unlit in the kitchen drawer and lit it with some matches I also found there. Mum and Dad were always prepared for all sorts of eventualities. I looked back in the living room. There on the shelves are pictures from a time way gone, of me as a kid, my mum and Dad, kicking a ball in some park. Next to it was a clock that still carried time, a piece of paper with my mum's handwriting on it, a shopping list, an ornament my dad had brought for their anniversary, well polished and looked after, next to the picture of them with beaming smiles. I walked up the carpeted stairs with the light shining a little distance in front of me. I opened my bedroom door. It was just the same as I had left it, along with a green toy puppet I played with as a kid. Then I walked across the corridor to my mum and Dad's bedroom. I pushed the door ajar and peered in. The light of the candle wasn't sufficient to tell me at the distance whether they were alive or dead. There was no movement, no acknowledgement of my entrance, but I had to walk up close to be sure. As I got nearer, I could see my mum's eyes flickering from one side to another. I jumped on the bed to hug her. As I did, I felt the coldness of my dad. It was that unmistakable cold of death. I looked at my father's face one more time. His eyes were staring straight up to the ceiling. In them, I saw a certain kind of sadness. His hands were clasped together. I felt in my mind whether maybe he had hoped to have seen me before he had given up his last breath. And maybe that disappointment, as hard as it was for me to acknowledge, was the fact that I had made it too late. I started to cry uncontrollably, as the man I had so much admired, the man who gave me love like no other, who brought me up into this world, was no more. My mother began to cough in a painful way. I pulled myself closer to her. I started to speak. Even though it probably didn't make much sense, I knew not what to say, but I could tell from the lack of her reaction that she could not understand. Her pupils flickered constantly from side to side. Fluid dribbled from her mouth to a wet patch on her shirt. She mumbled a few words, but they were inaudible. I could not make out what she said. Oh God, I thought. Now I had wished that she too was dead like my father, for I could see she was in pain, and was no longer the mother I knew. I desperately wanted her to speak to me words of love as my mother had, and wanted her to just look into my eyes as she had when I was a kid. That beautiful gaze of motherly love, comfort and protection. It was all gone. Now her eyes showed only pain and a sense of abandonment. She mumbled something again, but I could not understand. The tears in my eyes ran down my cheeks to see this unfortunate scene, to witness the demise of your loved ones. I knew one day this would come, as all men have to taste of death. But oh God, what a suffering it is, to watch those you love wither away, those that brought you with love into life, to die alone and in pain. I sat by her, holding her hand, not knowing if she truly knew that I was there by her, and she coughed up some red blood and began to choke. Her eyes stopped darting for a moment and focused squarely on my face. And for a second I thought her mouth curled up to make a smile. And then the life was sucked out of her. And with that last exhale, she was no more. I sat by the foot of my parents' bed for an age, just sobbing into my hands, whilst my mind, like a movie, played back all those scenes of childhood, of the good times, the bad times, making me laugh and guilty at the same time. I left that room, switched off the light and sat on my old bed, stared out as I did when I was younger, the window into the night sky, until my eyes could take it no more, and a sweeter slumber did I fall.